So at that point, we're not only healing the individual, but we're also healing their entire lineage.
Nice.
And yeah, and then so that's where the ancestral healing and the psycho-spiritual coaching comes in. And then after that is when that full-on divine feminine embodiment can happen, because the person has healed enough to where they're now able to hold enough light and soft feminine energy inside of them to, bring that out into the world and offer that as a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's amazing work. And I like your process of that. So let's talk about this because I think there might be, especially some men who might be listening to this, who are going divine feminine embodiment. Well, I guess this is all about women. And I think that's probably not true because obviously we do have masculine and feminine energy in
Mhm.
all of us. So how about you share a little bit about why that's relevant, especially for men as well as women?
Yeah, wonderful question. So, yeah, so every single human being holds both polarities, right? We each hold the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And, this is not gender specific. Regardless of whether which gender you identify with, one usually does tend to be a little bit more dominant than the other. And, but regardless of that, I think generally in the world, feminine energy is what is most needed at this time for healing, because even for men, um, trauma doesn't discriminate. Men have trauma as well. They have inner child wounds, they have ancestral wounds, and really healing that requires coming into this soft space of, again, just witnessing inside. I think men and even women nowadays are so programmed from a young age to be in this energy of like doing and proving and, trying to just be all these things for everybody, where they really disconnect from their core self. And so true deep healing requires being instead of doing. It requires, going, having the courage and the compassion to really go inside and connect with yourself, all of the different parts of yourself. And that requires being able to foster internal safety, emotional safety. And I feel like our society is not very, it's not very resourced. Well, I have to say nowadays it is getting really, really good, but historically it hasn't been very well resourced when it comes to emotional literacy. So a lot of people, grew up not having the tools they needed to work with their emotions and understand their emotions. If there would be an argument, it would blow up into this big thing in a lot of families that would cause these huge rifts that, where it doesn't need to be that disproportionate of a reaction. If we just knew how to work with our anger and, and not also label it as something bad, but see it for what it is, that, hey, I had a boundary that was crossed. This is why I'm getting angry. And I just need to go within and really understand this for myself. So I don't let this happen again. So going back to the question, is that men also need to be able to understand their own feminine side and to be able to respect it. And with that, I have to say that, with the whole pedestalizing of masculinity that happens in our society, a lot of times the feminine is perceived as being weak, where it's like, oh, you're too sensitive, or you're too emotional. It's seen as a weakness, where actually it's a strength. Being able to understand your emotions and work with them is a strength, because when you don't understand that and you're just going through life, feeling numb or reacting, that's what's perceived as masculinity, is not feeling your emotions and being strong in that way of numbing yourself. And that's actually not healthy. That's what has caused so many wars, right? And that's what's created all this generational trauma. So I feel like society as a whole is actually coming slowly, gradually, more than ever now into this realization that actually we are enough. We don't need to be doing all these things in order to prove our worth. We can just go within, right? Understand, well, who am I really? What am I feeling? And what does it mean? And it's that softness that we're coming into as a collective now, of understanding that we as we are in just our beingness is enough. The experiencing of our internal state is enough. Um, and that is feminine energy, and that applies to all genders. Um, so so yeah, it's really, yeah, really important at this time for everybody to open up more to their emotions and their feminine side.
You know, it's interesting you brought because you talked about the emotional intelligence piece of it, and one of the things that I see as a responsibility, but how that's going to start to transition and happen, I don't know. But I do believe that maybe our educational systems and sometimes even our corporate cultures are not necessarily set up to instill, teach, and help people understand and deal with their emotions and where they are from an emotional intelligence standpoint. Um, is that something you kind of see from your side of the fence too? Is that we could do better as a society and how we structure things and are more open and how we communicate in those different spaces?
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think the corporate world, more than anything, is so hyper masculinized, where it's like, we don't do feelings here. It's only about it's only about tasks, right? It's only
Right.
about getting things done. So, like, only talk to me about work. But I think the more we make room for people's whole selves to come into the picture, the more we can grow. Well, first of all, the company and the business can be healthier because they're not going to have as many employees, you know, kind of going out the door. Um, and because let's face it, right? Like in the workplace, more than anything, because we spend so much time there, a lot of our inner child wounds show up there in relation to our boss and our coworkers. Um, and so, I mean, a lot of companies are doing really well nowadays because they have a lot of coaching programs. When it comes to emotional intelligence. So, employees have those resources nowadays to start understanding, right, their emotions in context of relationships at work. But I definitely feel there is a strong need to have inner child oriented programs, coaching programs in the corporate world. Um, that would really help the company, because the more emotionally literate the employees are, um, the more work gets done from a place that's collaborative, right? Instead of self oriented, and, the less competition there is amongst employees. And, it's like, and also the people who genuinely feel aligned with the company's mission are going to be there, right? Um, so this process of self-discovery, it not only benefits the individual, right, because they find out their purpose, they heal their inner child wounds, their family stuff, right, and they become a more integrated whole human being. But then when we have more integrated whole human beings as a collective of people, we function better as a society where the things that actually need to happen are happening, right, and people are working better together.
No, 1,000%. You know, and you hear a lot of people with corporate cultures and different places like that. Oh, that's all woo woo stuff, and we don't want to hear that. And no, we don't need a meditation room, and no, we don't need this, right? But if you understand that, as you said, people spend literally a third of their lives in some situations, if not more, with that group of people
Hmm.
throughout your working career. So
Yeah.
that represents a large share of your energy, your effort, your mental state, your emotional state,
Mhm.
etc. So offering things that reinforce, strengthen, and cause things to be more collaborative, more productive, more one mindedness, I think really can make a difference in the success of the business. As you said, conflict versus collaboration is a huge thing that we can benefit from because there really becomes less combativeness. There becomes less competitiveness and more win-win. Yes, we can do this together. Here's the right idea. Here's the best solution. So I really would like to see some of that start to happen in the workplace for sure, but even in our educational system, because there are a lot of times when things are set up to specifically show and shine a light on the competitive side versus the collaborative, emotional, it's okay to be who you are side of
Mhm.
things. I think that's very relevant.
Yeah.
So that said, I want to kind of go back to one thing you said earlier, and this is when we were talking about that core wound, right? And again, it could be something that's specific to you individually. It could be something that's generationally and goes back many generations. Um, Once you've identified that and helped them truly see where that originated from within their specific situation, um, what are the typical steps that you would use? And again, I know it's kind of hard to say typical because each individual is a little bit different. But and I guess what I'm asking is, what involvement or activities do you typically ask the individual to do to start to move themselves forward, or is there just don't know because each person's different?
Yeah. So it is unique to each person what the, as I like to call them, the embodiment practices are going to be, right? So the first part of the healing work is the energetic change, and then the second part is the client embodying the behavioral change. And so the prescription for the embodiment is going to be different based on who the ancestors are of that particular client, because they usually are the ones prescribing, the behavioral change. But a lot of times the commonality I've seen is that the ancestors really just want the client to start seeing themselves as the light bearer, like the torch bearer, or like the altar, if you will, of the change and the healing that's happening. They want them to start seeing themselves in a different light. And that is so important, because that really is preventative against a lot of the shame and the guilt that we were talking about from earlier. Because for people who have been estranged from their families, if they do choose to reconnect, if they haven't changed the way that they're viewing themselves, they risk falling back into a lot of the old patterns, even though their family could have changed because they felt the ripple effect of the healing, the energetic healing. But if the individual, the cycle breaker, is still seeing themselves in that, from that old lens, um, the healing doesn't really have a place to land and continue rippling forward. um, so that's really one of the main things I've noticed is a change in self-concept is so important. People understanding their role as the cycle breaker, and really understanding the significance of that is so important.
Okay.
And it's not like there's only one cycle breaker in a family or a lineage. There could be multiple, but every one is going to have a unique purpose and a different way, different patterns that they're breaking.
Mhm. Very true. So, last couple of things I want to touch on here, and it's interesting because in my coaching practice, the first thing that I have to, I guess, have them realize and then work to overcome is the resistance piece. We talked about the resistance earlier, right? Because you're resisting, which is obviously what's kind of keeping you where you are to begin with, is that resistance part. And then once you've gotten past that, then it's the next pill you have to swallow, and that's kind of what you were just alluding to there, and that's the acceptance piece, right?
Mhm.